Hello, welcome back to another video. I am Ramona, and this video is about paranormal experiences and people talking about them, or not talking about them, or saying they don't believe in them, or whatever. So let's just get into it, shall we? Alright, first one. Yes, a few years back I lived in a rented house. My first night in the house, I heard what sounded like a box of books, which there were plenty, being dropped on the floor from a few feet off the ground. Later, my landlord, who had lived in the house previously, told the story of her girls playing in one of the closets and laughing. She asked what they were doing. They said, playing with Grandy. Grandy was the name of a woman who lived in the house when it was built. I have documentary proof of that. After my fiancé moved in, anytime something odd happened, we'd just say, oh, that was Grandy. There was a closet we'd rarely use, which we called the Grandy closet. I'm still a skeptic, but I love to tell that story. Someone, of course, says, no, I don't believe in the paranormal at all, which is perfectly within your right to do so. 51 years old, well-traveled, and have never seen anything unexplainable. My mother claims to have seen a ghost train, however, and it's actually a fairly well-documented and often seen ghost outside of Richmond, Virginia, where she grew up. So, who knows? Science and atheist, so that's a big no from me. And someone replied with, as a scientist, you should accept that you cannot, at this time, explain everything. Scientists do in fact accept that. They just don't take mental leaps without evidence. That's a big difference. I am not attributing causality. It would help if I could read sometimes. My dad had just passed away, and I was making pasta and used a jarred sauce. The jar was unopened, and I placed it on the counter. The lid popped and spun off the jar. I said, thank you, Dad. I knew it was his doing. My dad's right hand was injured badly many years before, and he developed arthritis. It cannot open jars any longer. He would hand them to me, and I would tell him that it bothered, and I could tell that it bothered him to ask me to do it. Aw, that is so sweet. His way of letting you know that he's okay and happy and healthy again. Yes, I was wandering around a psychic fair and saw a man standing over a woman who was laying on a table in front of him. It was a folding table, so I could see under it. It was about 10 feet away from him. He was waving his arms over her and sweating profusely. I thought it was the silliest thing I'd ever seen and couldn't figure out what he was supposed to be doing. Suddenly, a mist rose off of her body into the air. He looked around triumphantly, but I was the only one watching. He gave me a dignified nod as I stood there with my mouth open. I was close enough to see that there was nothing attached to the table that could cause the mist. It came from her chest. I don't know what it was, but I'll never forget that moment. It sounds kind of like he was a physical medium and he was removing something from her, but I could be wrong. Yes, in a very old house, a lady would sing to my baby daughter upstairs when she was in her cot. When we crept closer, the singing would stop. Then it would resume when we all went back downstairs. Never managed to open the door before it went quiet. Couldn't make out the words or the song. So two things came out of this experience. A ghost did not appear scary at all, and because whoever it was aware of our presence. So not a random event, but something like a recording. I had an out-of-body experience once in a period when I was also having what we know today as sleep paralysis events. Decades later, during another sleep paralysis time, I would swear I was fully awake when my late husband snuggled up behind me and said, I see you. It was a warm, happy experience that still makes me smile. I'm a committed atheist who knows there is no afterlife, but when I want to, I have no trouble also knowing that he is up there playing with our dogs and waiting for me. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. I've never experienced anything. My dad stayed in an old hotel in Greece and woke up one morning to a ghost at the end of the bed just looking at him. After he got up, he asked the front desk if people had reported ghost sightings before, and the clerk replied, all the time. I don't believe in ghosts, so I think maybe he was still sleeping. If he did in fact see something, he swears he did, I think it's a logical explanation that we just don't know yet. I like to think maybe multi-dimensional dimensions exist, and sometimes they bleed together, like radio stations when adjusting the knob. And someone asked, have you heard of hippopompic hallucinations? I've never even seen that one. I've had a couple of them, and it's so strange because I knew I was awake and what I was seeing couldn't possibly be real, but it was creepy. Life is filled with strange experiences, but to call something paranormal unexplainable just because one doesn't have an explanation based on one's own knowledge is lazy thinking. Most people don't have much more than a rudimentary understanding of what actually is known and how to find reliable information. The reply was, my experience was shared with another person. A dish moving across the counter by itself, an outrageous distance. I like your comment, but that's very unexplainable. Unexplainable on the surface or by the persons involved, but still potentially explainable if circumstances surrounding the event are carefully examined. Just because I can't explain something doesn't mean something is unexplainable. I don't believe in that sort of stuff, even though I've actually sought out ghosts in supposedly haunted hotels, and I've wandered cemeteries at night. I did have a very odd incident once, though. My husband always claimed that he sensed things, and I humored him because I love him and it was harmless. But one night at a place where we'd never been before, he picked up on something and asked the owners about it. They were visibly uneasy and didn't want to talk, but my husband kept adding details until they started nodding, wide-eyed, started telling their own experiences. This was long before every place had a web presence, and there was no way he could have zeroed in on all of that randomly. The owners didn't appear to be acting when they confirmed what he was telling them. Whatever was happening, it was legitimate, and he didn't have to me, and it doesn't have to mean it was anything supernatural. I remain skeptical to this day, but ever after, if he told me he sensed a presence somewhere, I just smile and wave. There's a lot out there that science says we can't see, so I don't consider it entirely out of the realm of possibility that there's even more. Therefore, I figure the least I can do is appear friendly, just in case. Yes, I have experienced unexplained events here and there over the years. What it tells me is that we are connected at some level, both while alive and after death. It doesn't change my religious beliefs, but there is something else there that science has yet to discover. My mom talks to ghosts. I've seen her blink out and start speaking weirdly to an empty spot in the living room. My son even witnessed this a few years ago, too, so I tried to shut myself off from the spiritual stuff. But then something would rattle our dishes in the kitchen at night, and the microwave would beep randomly. My mom always called the ghost Frank. I slept on the other side of the walls of the kitchen. It was not fun. No, none. I don't believe anything is on the other side as far as the afterlife to this existence. However, the multiverse is looking more and more likely. I'm not sure how they would work for any one person to have one universe. I guess if you die here, you'd keep on living in a different multiverse. With all of yous would have a natural lifespan, so you'd all die eventually. I don't know that the various yous would ever be aware of each other. It's wild stuff, quantum physics. No. One unexpected weirdness can, in retrospect, be explained by sleep deprivation, cold medicines, and the seventh grader's growing mouthwash habit. I don't know if there's still alcohol mouthwash. It's like schnapps, but breakfasty. My friend and work colleague of 18 years died from cancer. I asked him very seriously that when he passed to the other side if he could show me a sign by making my living room regulator clock stop. 24 hours after his death, the clock stopped, and I had to start it up again by tapping the pendulum. It gave me shivers. Oh, yeah. Once in the army, I was in my barracks room, hungover. A movement alert that had been called at 4 a.m. My roomies all took off and left. I sat down for a second and fell asleep. Woke up after I felt someone tap me on the shoulder and say, "Get up now. You can make it if you run." So I did. And I made it to the formation just as the first sergeant yelled, "Company, fall in." Moved out to Goff, I can't even pronounce that one, with the rest of the company. It wouldn't have been pretty for me if I hadn't have been woken. Still don't know what that was all about. I really felt someone tap me on the shoulder and say, "Get up, run if you make it." Yep, the first house my husband and I owned was my grandmother's when we bought it from my mom and dad after her death. She and my grandfather were the original owners. We had a number of weird experiences when we first moved in, but after our son was born, things got really interesting. His nursery had been my dad's bedroom when he was a boy, and sometimes my son, not able yet to talk, would seem to be having a back and forth conversation with someone when I was trying to rock him to sleep at night. He'd stand up in my lap and look to something behind me, which was a blank wall, and babble with breaks here and there, as if he were listening to someone and then replying. But then, when he was a toddler, he would sometimes talk about a woman in the house. He didn't have a large enough vocabulary to go into detail about her, but when I finally asked him one day what the woman was doing, he replied, "Broom." When my grandmother had the stroke that killed her, she was sweeping leaves with from the front walkway. So, actually kind of cool to think my grandmother, to whom I was very close, might have been making the occasional appearance in the house while we were there. After we moved, nothing like that happened again. Yes, I have posted this before. I was very close to my late mother-in-law. She was an extraordinary woman of faith. I truly loved and missed her. We hired a companion to sit with her at my brother-in-law's house. We lived next door and saw her daily. She became great friends with this companion, E. It came time when we couldn't care for her anymore and had to place her in a nursing home. My husband and I were both working, and we saw her every evening. She passed away a couple of years later at the age of 96. Her companion, E, called my sister-in-law excited. E had to have surgery and was nervous with anxiety. The night before surgery in the hospital, the nurse wanted to give her something to relax, but she refused. She swears she looked up and saw my mother-in-law walk into the room. She smiled at her. "E, it's going to be okay." She turned and walked out of the room. That was what E told us. I don't really care if you believe or not. I'm not surprised. Later, we had a family event at my brother-in-law's house where she lived. The party was winding down, and most had left, a few people still standing and talking. I had an overwhelming feeling that she was like right beside me, and I got teary-eyed. And trust me, I don't cry. My brother-in-law looked up from me across the room and said, "I wish V could have been here." He answered, "She is." He told me he felt that as well. What did I feel? A presence, simply as that. I don't believe in the paranormal in the accepted sense, but I do believe in the spiritual world. And there are two incidences of many. Yep, and I'll never waffle on it. I hadn't really thought about ghosts when I moved to the UK for school. Just as a college kid, no opinion, although I wasn't impressed. Dorm was an old manor house. Whole school was the property. Kids there said it was haunted. I thought they were just screwing with the new kid. Yeah, well, they were not. Holy hell, it actually went well. It was well known for being haunted. Still, and this wild part was the first time something bizarre happened. I got the nerve to ask someone, this happened. And they said, "Oh, yes, that's just the ghost." Like it was the most normal thing on the planet. Made a believer out of me in a big hurry. If I was there for 2 years, lots of stuff, and no, you never got used to it. Well, I grew up in a haunted house, lived in a haunted dorm in college, lived in another haunted house, worked in a haunted building for 20 years, and currently live in a haunted house. I've seen 3 full-bodied apparitions, heard disembodied voices, and heard the ghost cat in the litter box. I think the disembodied voices is scarier than the actual saint figure. They're definitely startling. I was in bed, and my husband had already left for work while I was asleep still that morning and didn't realize he was gone. All of a sudden, while still in bed, mostly asleep, I get the feeling I'm not alone. I figured it was him and drifted in and out of sleep. Then someone sat down on the end of our bed, and I felt them turn and put their leg up, too. I thought, okay, he must be running late or something, and stayed laying down on my stomach with my face towards the wall. Then I called him. I got up 5 minutes later, and he was already at work and had been there the whole time and hadn't run late in the morning at all. I don't know what it was, but I know someone was sat at the end of my bed, because I felt the weight and the movement of the springs when someone else gets into bed with you. My whole body moved with the motion of it. I'll never forget that. I've seen a ghost. I believe there is a scientific explanation for the apparition. Humans are superstitious about anything presently inexplicable. About 3 a.m. every night, my cat meows very loudly down the hall. It wakes me up, but then I go to sleep. One incident happened after my father passed away. My dad died on Christmas Eve in the hospital. I was helping my mom set up decorations. My dad was supposed to get an hour past the hospital to attend the dinner with family. I was setting up the tree, usually his job, but it was a bit heavy for me. It slipped, and I got a face full of lush pine smell, so I wrestled it into place. Just as this happened, the doorbell rang. It was my mom's pastor and his wife. They had just been to the hospital. My dad had passed, and they came to tell her. The rest of the day was a blur. Months later, I was sitting at his desk. His picture was just over it on the wall. And I was working on my computer when suddenly there was a big waft of pine smell in my face. I got up, checked around, and there was no pine smell in the rest of the small room. No air fresheners, no flower arrangements, nothing that could cause that smell. My shirt even had a residual pine smell, like I'd gotten hugged by a pine tree. But I took it in the spirit that it was my dad, who was very outdoorsy and a scoutmaster, who took us all camping when I was growing up. It seemed a very special visit by him, a perfect moment of a final goodbye. I think there is an explanation for everything. Back in the 60s, my neighborhood briefly was completely bonkers because a couple of kids ran from the woods on a Saturday morning, screaming they had encountered spacemen, men from Mars. A couple of parents went to look, and they were quickly joined by others. They looked like a group of vigilantes. The spacemen were contractors wearing yellow rain gear, full-face rubber masks with hoses connected to a canister, and backpacks with hoses spraying for mosquitoes. Too much Twilight Zone. This isn't paranormal, but the story of how my husband and I met is bizarre. I visited a friend for a weekend in another city. Saturday night, I was getting on the train home when I decided to get off. No reason. I'm not spontaneous. My feet literally took me off the train. I walked to a store and bought a very short, cropped sweatshirt. Not my normal style for back then, shy girl. Took the subway back to my friend's house. We all went to a party. A group of uninvited guys came in, and one walked up to me and asked me to say we were friends so he could get in. I did, and his friends got kicked out. We hung out all night, dancing, laughing, and parting ways. Didn't know each other's last names. 2 weeks later, I was in yet another city riding my bike. There was a small accident, and the man who had been hit, tapped really, by a car next to me. He rolled a bit, and guess what? It was the guy. It was like, OMG, what the heck situation. Again, we parted ways. Hadn't talked about where we were from, nothing. Another few weeks later, I am locking my bike in front of my dad's office and look up, and there he is. Turns out we were living in the same city, had some work stuff in common, and had been ignoring the fact that the universe was trying very, very hard to get us together. Gave him my number, and they say the rest is history. That was 36 years ago. Oh, and I was interrupted and forgot to finish a thought. I asked him later why he approached me at the party, as there had been tons of other girls. He said it's because I looked hot in the cropped sweatshirt that I had bought when I got off the train. That is a very sweet story. I like that. Minnie, recently at my deceased parents' house, going through boxes. This was in the Midwest, and people will just walk right into your house without knocking, calling for you. I wanted to go upstairs to work, so I decided to hook the screen door closed so they'd have to knock. About 10 minutes later, I hear my friend call for me and rush downstairs thinking, the door's locked, let me get down there to let him in. And I'm dumbfounded that he's standing in the middle of the kitchen. The dang ghosts undid the lock. There's no way he could have done it from the outside, and he wouldn't have anyway. I also have a ghost here at our current house that opens doors. For a while, we had a washing machine that top-loaded. Every time I'd go into the laundry room, the lid would be up, and the wash just sitting there in soapy water. I'd always ask my husband, who 1,000,000% would never play a prank on me, if he'd stop the wash for any reason. He'd say, no, why are you asking? This kept happening. So it was so mundane I barely noticed it until it became noticeable. One day I start the wash, take a few steps out of the laundry room, remember something I needed, and immediately turn around, lid is up. There was a door opening event yesterday, but it's boring. Basically a shower door that was wonky with a wonky seal, making it impossible to close, fell loudly, popped open after my shower yesterday. I could hear it behind me, even though I had left the door open and there was no way it could have returned to being fully closed. Then popping open with a distinctive sound. My husband says it's the hot air escaping, but that makes 0 sense, and would happen all the time if that were the case. This has happened twice, distinctly, in 10 years. Didn't happen to me, but a friend told me that she was tending to her toddler in bed in the middle of the night when her little girl kept waving to the second floor window like she saw someone she recognized. Finally got the kid down, went back to bed, woke up the next morning to learn a close friend had died of cancer that night before about that same time. This friend was like an honorary auntie to my daughter, who was crazy about her. And that's it for that entire thread. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a comment or a like, subscribe to my channel, or share this video with someone you love or someone you hate. Who am I to judge? Anyway, thank you for listening and watching, and go check out another video. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.